dangerous situation. The criminal gangs are undermining border security. They are putting lives at risk. In the first half of the year, the numbers of crossings that we inherited from the previous government were a record high for spring crossings. Those gangs should not be able to get away with it, and that's why we're determined to go after them with the National Crime Agency, working with Europol, expanding the additional investigators that we're recruiting for.
UK Connors. Starmer's Egypt Summit, a game-changing moment. Right, before we dive into what's genuinely one of the most consequential geopolitical moments of the year, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Seriously, because what's about to unfold, the contradictions, the posturing, the actual stakes, this is a kind of British politics meets international diplomacy story that absolutely demands your attention. And trust me, we got plenty more where this came from. Now, let's get into it. Keir Starmer is boarding a plane to Egypt, not for a holiday, not for some ceremonial photo opportunity, but to attend what's being billed as a historic peace summit that could fundamentally reshape the entire Middle Eastern political landscape. And here's where it gets properly interesting, because this isn't just about Starmer showing up. This is about Britain positioning itself, flexing its diplomatic muscles, and trying to remind the world that despite everything, despite the mess at home, despite the political fires Labour's been fighting, we still matter on the world stage. Which, frankly, is rather important when you're a Prime Minister trying to establish credibility. The summit is happening on Monday in Sharm el-Sheikh, and it's being co-hosted by Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and Donald Trump. Now, pause on that for a second. Trump, the man's barely settled into his second term and is already orchestrating what amounts to a diplomatic masterclass, brokering a ceasefire in a 2-year conflict that's consumed Gaza, killed tens of thousands, destabilized the entire region, and frankly, become something of a political minefield for world leaders. Emmanuel Macron's going, the French president himself, and practically every significant leader worth their salt is getting an invitation. This is a kind of summit where, if you're not there, people start wondering if you become diplomatically irrelevant. But here's the thing about Starmer attending, and this is where British politics gets genuinely complicated. His government made a point of officially recognizing Palestine just last month. A deliberate move, mind you, calculated, designed to keep alive the prospect of a two-state solution, to signal to the international community that Britain takes Palestinian statehood seriously, and perhaps, just perhaps, to throw down a little gauntlet against some of the more hardline pro-Israel positions you've seen echoing through certain corners of Westminster. So Starmer's showing up to this summit not as some passive observer, but as a leader of a country that's literally repositioned itself on this issue. He's going to thank Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey for their role in the negotiations. He's going to express Britain's support for the implementation of this agreement, and is going to call, quite explicitly, for continued international coordination to move toward Phase 2 of the ceasefire. Phase 2. That's the critical part, because here's what everyone's conveniently glossing over. We've been down this road before. Back in January, another ceasefire came into effect. Everyone celebrated. The international community patted itself on the back. And then, after just 2 months, it all collapsed. Israel resumed military operations because, and this is crucial, the initial agreement never actually got past stage 1 of a 3-stage plan. So what we're really looking at here is a mechanism that's already failed once. The same mechanism, the same players, the same underlying territorial disputes and historical grievances that have proven utterly intractable for decades. Now, what Starmer is specifically calling for, beyond just a ceasefire itself, is absolute focus on Hamas decommissioning, getting a proper ceasefire monitoring mission deployed, and establishing transitional governance arrangements in Gaza. These aren't small asks. Decommissioning Hamas? That's essentially demanding that one of the most powerful militant organizations in the region voluntarily disarm. It's asking for something that sounds straightforward in a press release but is practically impossible in reality. Transitional governance? After 20 months of warfare that's killed over 67,000 people, with estimates suggesting more than 18,000 children, you're trying to create functioning government structures in territory that's been absolutely pulverized. The infrastructure's shattered, the institutions are depleted, and the political landscape is fractured beyond recognition. What makes Starmer's positioning particularly astute and yes, there's definitely political calculation happening here, is that is framing Britain's role not as some muscular military intervention, but as a provider of diplomatic support and economic assistance. Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper explicitly stated that Britain has no plans to send troops as part of any multinational monitoring force. Instead, the UK is looking at channeling private finance into Gaza, supporting humanitarian efforts, and maintaining diplomatic engagement. It's smart positioning because it allows Britain to be seen as seriously engaged without committing boots on the ground to what could very easily become a protracted and politically toxic situation. The Americans are deploying up to 200 troops already based in the region. Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey are involved. But Britain? Britain's going to do the banking and the talking, which, let's be honest, is rather more comfortable than the alternative. The broader context here cannot be ignored. This ceasefire was brokered by the US, Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, a coalition notably absent any of the traditional European powers. Trump's orchestrated this. He's literally overshadowed all of his predecessors' failed attempts at Middle Eastern peacemaking by, ironically, working with the same partners and leveraging the same diplomatic channels, but doing it with what appears to be considerably more success. For Starmer, and frankly for Britain's entire foreign policy establishment, there's an uncomfortable reality. We're not driving this process. We're attending. We're supporting. We're offering continued cooperation. But we're not the architects anymore. That role belongs to Washington and Cairo, with supporting performances from Doha and Ankara. The irony is particularly delicious when you consider that just weeks ago, Britain recognized Palestine. It was presented as its principled stand, this moral clarity about the need for a two-state solution. And then, almost immediately, Britain finds itself at a summit negotiated by powers with considerably different geopolitical interests and strategic calculations. The U.S. wants a win. Egypt wants stability on its border and continued influence. Qatar and Turkey have their own regional ambitions and alignments. And Britain? Britain wants to be seen as principled, engaged, and diplomatically serious while simultaneously not overcommitting to what could become a disaster if, and this is a significant if, the ceasefire collapses yet again. Because let's talk about that possibility, because it's hanging over everything. The previous ceasefire lasted 2 months. 2 months before it fell apart. The underlying issues, Israeli security concerns, Palestinian sovereignty, the status of settlements, the question of who governs Gaza long-term, none of those have actually been resolved. They've just been papered over with another agreement. An agreement that, yes, is more comprehensive than the last one. Trump's 20-point plan is considerably more detailed. But comprehensiveness and viability are not necessarily synonymous, especially when you're dealing with actors as committed to their respective positions as Israel and Hamas are. What Starmer's betting on is that international coordination, continued pressure, and economic incentives might actually make a difference this time. That the presence of world leaders at a signing ceremony, the commitment of resources, the diplomatic weight, that all of it adds up to something more sustainable than what came before. It's not an unreasonable bet, but it's also not a sure thing. Not remotely. So as Starmer boards that plane to Egypt, his carrying with him Britain's hopes for regional stability, its commitment to a two-state solution, and its desire to remain diplomatically relevant in a moment where the initiative clearly lies elsewhere. His attending as supporter of a process he didn't shape, representing a country that's just repositioned itself on the issue, and hoping that this time, just maybe, things will actually hold together. Whether they do remains to be seen. But one thing's absolutely certain. The next few months are going to be absolutely vital for determining whether this summit becomes a historic turning point or just another false dawn in the Middle East. This is precisely the kind of complex, consequential geopolitics that we'll be breaking down in upcoming videos, the real implications, the shifting power dynamics, the domestic political fallout. Because these stories matter, and they deserve more than just the headlines. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next.